Hello and welcome to Tennis Stories. I'm your host, Donyshia Boston-Hill, head of NJTL Strategic Partnerships and Events at USTA Eastern. So everyone has a tennis story. And on this podcast, we're interviewing some interesting folks in the USTA section. That's New York, New Jersey, and parts of Connecticut. To hear what it is about this story that takes us from enjoying it as a hobby to an all out obsession. My guest today is Dale Evans, Director of Tennis Operations at the world famous USTA Billie Jean King National Tennis Center, home of the US Open. Dale, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be with you all today, Donyshia.
We're so happy to have you. And we're just going to jump right into it, Dale, because we know your time is precious. Tell us about your tennis history and when was the first time you picked up a racket?
It's a 31-year backtracking of a story. I began tennis when I was about 9 years old. Played baseball half the year growing up in Oakland, California for the first 6 months of each year, and played tennis for the second 6 months of each year after baseball. Back then, of course, you would have more multi-sport athletes. So we'd have different calendar events or different sports throughout the calendar year. And when I was about 11 or 12, decided to commit to tennis full time after a different baseball season and different baseball experience when I was about 11 or 12. And that was a great segue for me into the tennis full-time world was the Pacific Coast Championships, which is an ATA affiliated event out of Los Angeles and Oakland, and it was West Coast oriented. And my first Pacific Coast Championships was, I believe, 1992, maybe 1993. And it was centered around Labor Day weekend. And once I played that event, I was bitten by the tennis bug and never really looked back.
Was it the winning? Was it just the energy? Was it hitting the racket? All of the above?
To be quite honest, I'll be politically correct. It was the co-ed availability of, I can say it that way. I, played baseball and pretty much was, single gender. And once we played the Pacific Coast Championships, there was a gala event on, I forget, the Saturday or Sunday, but they went into the history of the American Tennis Association with the gala event, and it was capped off by it was actually my first um, dance experience or kind of ball experience where the boys and the girls who were under the age of 18 had a dance for all of us. So that was my first dance, and was also my segue into the tennis world. So kind of great how those two things synced up, so to speak.
Nice, nice. And so you've been playing tennis for quite some time. And even we've heard you say that you actually received your higher education on the court. How did that help frame who you are as a person?
I mean, you said higher education on the court.
Yes.
So I think one of the best things about my experience, or one of my favorite aspects of being on the tennis court, was always being in the presence of inspirational leaders. And I grew up under my tennis coach was Mark Manning, who he was one of the first, if not the first, minority president over a USTA section, Northern California, back in the early 2000s, I believe he was. And he was my coach, and he raised a host of us. So I had a great and inspirational leader there. I went on to play under Coach Willie Shepard at Jackson State, and he was also a part of that inspirational leadership. He helped lead us to an undefeated conference championship my freshman year at Jackson State. And I was always fortunate to work around those same personalities once I segued into the tennis industry. So I've traveled with a host of coaches and worked with a host of great tennis professionals, and also was able to be in the arena and the forums with them from an organizational governance standpoint and leadership also.
That's amazing. And so, ladies and gentlemen out there listening or watching, I want to tell you that Dale is the most humble, gentleman we can meet in the tennis world. I mean, he's the director of tennis operations at the Billie Jean King National Tennis Center. And so when we look at your resume, Dale, I mean, it goes back 7 awards from USTA NorCal. We're just going to go through your resume. We're going to let the people know and give
Um,
you your roses while you're here. You know, you've been the director of tennis in California for the Bayo Vista Swim and Tennis Club. You also had a time that you were the head tennis professional at the Claremont Club and Spa in Berkeley, California, and also the tennis and academic operations and partnerships at Youth Tennis Advantage in the San Francisco Bay Area. I mean, that California life is tennis 12 months out of the year. And so, how does a kid from Oakland become the director of tennis operations at the National Tennis Center here in New York?
well, one of the things I learned at being at the Claremont under a great, working with a great master professional, Rosie Baris, is the more you learn, the more you earn. And I think that, keeping our ears to the ground in the tennis industry on always answering the question or trying to be ahead of the curve in terms of what's next and continuing to innovate and evolve as tennis professionals. So whether that means learning more and adding more to your repertoire on court, that's always needed. But I also think there are aspects of building yourself as a complete and total professional that require you to be involved in governance and leadership and making sure that you're involved with all the organizations within the sphere of tennis. So then I think I'm really fortunate to have had a leadership role and not only, been a leader, but also sat on the sidelines as a committee member or a volunteer in different capacities through multiple organizations within the tennis industry.
That's fantastic. And so, Dale, what is it like working at tennis clubs in California versus being here? Besides the obvious sunny California, right?
Right. Well, I think one of the things is I was fortunate enough to work in three different tennis arenas and different layers of ownership and stakeholders, so to speak. So at one, you had a very small, a family-owned club, so to speak, multiple families, so a small board there, and so you have different community stakeholders, and then moved on to one where it's more corporate owned, and so again, different community stakeholders, and then transitioning into the nonprofit tennis forum. So we've always been in multiple forums and understanding what's the community that you're working with and who are the best players in the arena to help you get the job done as a team and stay connected as a great team as you work towards goals.
Absolutely. And you mentioned team, and it's so hard to think about team, especially within tennis, right? Because you're solo player 50% of the time on the court. And so you've probably seen a few crazy things or interesting things in your career. Can you tell us about a funny story and something that really is in your mind that's the lasting memory from your time working in clubs in California?
Wow. Wow. That's a great question, Donyshia, because the stories that are really popping to the forefront of my mind, I'm probably going to protect those that are involved in it, and I might have been involved.
Keep it for the book, Dale. Keep it for the book.
Yeah, keep saving for the book. I would say really my favorite, my because one of the things about being a part of a team is you accomplish more, and we all hold true to the saying of if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So everything that I was able to accomplish over all the years, regardless of the fact that my name may be on awards, et cetera, they're really accomplished as a team. So I would say probably my proudest moment is what I'll shift to. And there are definitely some funny stories behind it. But my favorite and most proud moment was, beating Alcorn State for the third time in 2001 in the SWAC championship. And as a team, and also so we have multiple team members that cramped up during the capstone of celebration, and I was one of those. but that would be my proudest moment and one of my favorite moments that I would share before the book. Okay.
We'll take it. We'll take it. Any story is a good story, especially coming from you. And so now in your new position, what's your vision for the National Tennis Center? I mean, I'm sure it's a hefty load.
Right. I think right away we want to come in and make sure that we're having a positive culture within everything and we're making a great community impact and increasing our footprint in the tennis world and remaining national leaders in terms of programming and building players and turning participants into players is our vision here.
And now, I mean, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge Arthur Ashe over your shoulder. I mean, the National Tennis Center has a stadium, Arthur Ashe, named after him. So, we are, is he on your Mount Rushmore of tennis players? And if so, if not, who is?
I, you know, to be honest, this may sound interesting. He's on my Mount Rushmore of tennis figures, and I never really had an opportunity to dive tons into all of his video and playing. And of course, I grew up in the late 80s and 90s. So my Mount Rushmore started really with Pete Sampras and Steffi Graf. And as right now, we're in the midst of my current favorite player, even though he's battled a couple of injuries, is Dominic Thiem and Roger Federer. Of course, notice I went with all one-handers because I have a one-hand backhand.
Okay.
So that's there's a range of my Mount Rushmore, and I would narrow it down. But my two that stick out as tennis figures are Arthur Ashe and Billie Jean King, in terms of what they did for the sport at various times throughout. Billie Jean, respectively, with her kickstarting of Title IX and the impacts, or taking advantage, making sure that she was able to um, work into those forums where we see more gender equity in terms of pay scale and really starting that discussion back when they did. And now, of course, we've seen that prize money has become a positive thing on the female side, on the women's side. And Arthur Ashe, really, in terms of cultivating change from within. I know Ashe had a great quote, which was, you know, you want to listen to the people in order to lead the people, was essentially one of Arthur Ashe's greatest quotes. So those are my two figures that really stand out.
I mean, those are great figures to have. And so you mentioned a few people, and that's a nice segue right into our diversity, equity, and inclusion segment. So this episode is
Don't
being
get me in trouble here, Donyshia.
we won't. We won't. We'll keep.
Okay.
We need you to keep your job, Dale.
Okay.
So, this episode is being released during Black History Month, and one of our goals of this podcast is to interview people from the communities we're celebrating during these DE&I Heritage Month. Tennis has more to offer than being a diverse sport. We transcend the stereotypes that exist around the world. We look at and you hear things like, tennis is, a rich white leisure activity. And we know that's just not true. You
Mhm.
know, how has tennis really changed? How have you seen tennis change to become a more inclusive sport?
Well, I think early on, the movement in the early 90s across the country was identifying the committee structure and extending the committee structure, and started with minority participation was the name of the committees across the board. And you've seen a gradual evolution to diversity, to DE and I. And initially, in the late 90s, I believe it was, you saw that go into you saw that namesake transition into multicultural, and eventually diversity, and now diversity, equity, and inclusion. So across the board, you've seen USTA continue to embrace moving the needle positively and serving as a leader from that standpoint as the national governing body. And it really starts with the national governing body starting the movement. So I think embracing all demographics. Now we're inclusive of adaptive sports and wheelchair sports, and also initiatives that embrace the LGBTQ community. So you've seen this sphere of impact increase gradually from more of an ethnic centered progression to now where you're seeing everybody embraced in a more holistic manner. And I think that being at the National Tennis Center, one of our charges is to make sure that this is a home of the community and that everybody has an opportunity to play here.
That's fantastic, and it's so important that people see, you know, someone like yourself in the position you're in that can help work with his team to make change and be inclusive. So we really thank you for all that you do. Now, overall, you mentioned some mentors along the way. Were any of those mentors Black or Brown people that helped the industry and also helped inspire you?
Yes, I would say probably if I had to go down, I have a host of mentors. Some of them have passed away, of course. Some are, still around and have still continued to have tentacles within the tennis community. My most poignant, again, I mentioned my coach growing up. He was like a second father to me, and he was a very very large tennis titan within the Northern California tennis family. That's Mark Manning. Then transitioning, my college coach was a great college coach. We enjoyed him. I think he had enough of a leash. He gave us enough slack on the leash to enjoy being underneath his wing. And then Francisco Ruiz, who hails from Mexico City, and he is an academy owner in the Bay Area and really exposed me to my first international travels as a coach going back to, I believe, 2003 or 2004. And we spearheaded the Mexico City exchange program where we took somewhere in the area of 15 juniors over for a couple of weeks at a time to compete in Mexico City for about 3 years. And then also, one of my former, I work with the great Rosie Baris, who has always, had her eye on moving the needle in terms of continuing education. And so, she would be the woman that I worked with tons and was able to gain a lot of industry insight on. And I think that pretty much rounds out my three or four. And there's always more that I've spoken with and gleaned knowledge off of and continue to try to move the needle forward myself.
That's fantastic. And now you hear a lot about club play versus, park play. And I'm
Hmm.
sure you played in both arenas. So for the parent out there or the young person that's watching, that's, has aspirations of being the next Serena or Venus that started in Compton in the park, or Naomi Osaka that started, in Liberty Park, what would you give them as words of inspiration?
The most difficult challenge as a parent is to find the coach that fits your child. And before taking in accolades, before taking in pricing structure, before taking in facility, really, really taking a moment to really choose the coach and what they will do best for your child and how they will work with your child. And there's a lot of great coaches who may not quite fit. And I think that we always want to think about the most important relationships. It's a three-pronged relationship in tennis, which is parent, player, and pro. And by pro, I mean teaching pro. So really making sure that those three rungs of the ladder, those three chords, are intricately and synergistically involved is very important.
Oh, absolutely. And that's some great advice for all those listening. And now the rise of racket sports since the pandemic has
Uh-oh.
just been on an up level, uphill. What do you think about that rise? It's just like skyrocketing right now.
Well, I think that first off, our tennis statistics have held relatively true to 2 year growth. And I recently wrote a panel reply a few months back about tennis's 2 year gain. At that point was 27% roughly. And the numbers, fluctuate in terms of other racket sports. Of course, we'd be remiss to not mention that we know pickleball is the fastest growing sport in the country. And minus the statistics of what other racket sports are doing, I think one of the things that we need to embrace in tennis is that we've recently heard that the crossover rate when you have multiple racket sports going in a facility is roughly 30%. And so a lot of people are continuing to not just play one or two in an isolated manner, but really continuing to play multiple different sports and keep their attention in those facilities. So I think that's something that moving forward, we, you know, we have to keep that thought process in mind. We do want to make sure tennis stays at the forefront of moving the needle. And of course, we're here at the US Open and at the National Tennis Center, and that's our job to make sure we're leading and being a national leader and providing tennis opportunities.
Absolutely. And so, who do you see on the pro tour today that excites you for the next generation of greats?
Wow, I'm still enjoying. I'm still crying from the Rafa Federer doubles match.
Mhm.
So I've still have yet to come down off that emotional moment. I really, I still love Dominic Thiem. I'm a big one-hander fan, so it's
I'm noticing.
like I tend to be slanted a little bit in that regard, but Dominic Thiem really still excites me if he can battle back from that wrist injury a little bit ago. On the women's side, I've always liked what's her name, Svitolina,
Okay.
and I've always liked the layers to her game. I do miss Ash Barty, so it's time for me to hit the reset button in terms of where we are on transition to my favorites, my new upcoming favorites.
Okay. Okay. And so you mentioned one-handed. So how often do you get to play?
At this rate, I try to hit a ball about 15 minutes a day would be ideal.
Oh,
Realistically,
great.
yeah, realistically, I'm probably hitting 15 to 20 minutes a week. So, just between moving throughout the facility.
Okay. Not like you have anything else on your plate, Dell.
No, 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 no. I've never hit a tennis ball in my life, is what I'll say.
Now, do you have any good luck charms that you kept with you along the way to help you win all those championships that you mentioned earlier? Or
That is funny. Yes, I my teammates, college teammates, and I met on campus about 3 years ago, the year before the pandemic, so 2019 for a homecoming. And I was the only guy to still have one of my college playing shirts
oh,
from like 20 years ago. And so I think that was kind of a funny moment. Some of them have different things that they keep with them, but I really love playing. There was a specific shirt that I think we had from my junior year, and I love that one shirt. So I kept it as long as I could and preserved it. And I don't let anybody wash my college shirts. Uh, People can wash, my wife and kids and anybody else helping with laundry can wash anything else except for my Jackson State shirts.
nice, nice. And so Americans are really stepping it up at the Australian Open. If this trend continues, do you think this will be a turning point for Americans to watch more tennis, even with Serena's retirement?
So first off, let me sidestep that. Not only I gotta highlight this, Northern California Americans did really well also.
Okay.
So I know that Jensen Brooksby, has really been stepping it up the last 6 months or so,
Mhm.
and he works with Joe Gilbert out of Sacramento, and of course I'm from NorCal, so familiar, with the landscape geographically, and Mackie McDonald, who hails from the Claremont Resort and Spa in Berkeley, and so I think that's been really phenomenal to see not only what NorCal has done, but the nation has done. And I know Shelton is moving through the draw, and I believe I just saw yesterday or the day before he's the first since Arthur Ashe to get to this section of the tournament. haven't been an NCAA champion or player. And so I thought that was really important. I think that the big question for us to really answer is on the women's side, if we can have the breakthrough and transition from Coco and a host of other young women out there, Pagula, they're all playing really well. Then I think that bodes really well for us transitioning some of our fan attention to the next generation of young women.
Fantastic. And so, Dell, I know you have a mantra that you live by. Do you have a tennis mantra overall that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Yes, turn turn participants into players.
Mm,
That's my tennis industry mantra. Is we want to turn participants into players and increase playing opportunities.
that's fantastic. Is there anything, last few words you'd like to share with our audience out there?
I'd like to say, let's see everybody at the US Open 2023. And remember that there are 3 weeks to the Open. So we'll see you for Fan Week and the remaining main draw weeks. And we'd all love to have you guys all here and grab a honey deuce when you're here.
Well, Dell, I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Donyshia. And thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. This has been Tennis Stories from the USTA Eastern. Tune in later this month to hear our next tennis story in observance of Black History Month. Thank you for tuning in.